My name is Guillaume Saint-Pierre. I'll be your moderator. Minister, we'll start with quick comments for about 5 minutes, and then we have 20, 25 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Guillaume. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're gathered today on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. Also want to wish everyone happy National Tourism Week. I'm happy to be here for an announcement that I promised Canadian we will do. Because Canadians rely on the air sector and we need to ensure that their rights are even more protected. On doit protéger encore davantage leurs droits. Our government was the first ever in Canada's history to put in place a Bill of Rights for air passengers, which came into force in 2019. This regime gave Canadians important rights and protects them against flight delays and cancellations. Shortly after this regime came into force, the COVID-19 pandemic hit our air sector incredibly hard. The pandemic showed that there were some gaps in the regime. That's why we strengthened the protections last September to include refunds for situations outside the airline's control, such as a pandemic or a major weather event. Right now, everyone is entitled to a refund when the airlines are not able to complete the journey within a reasonable time frame. But last year, as the air sector began to recover, passenger volumes surged incredibly quickly, exposing the Bill of Rights to a lot of stress. As a result, we also saw passenger complaints increase at the Canadian Transportation Agency, leading to a significant backlog. These challenges have given us useful insight into how we can strengthen the rights and protect passengers even further. So this is exactly what we are doing. Today, I'm announcing that we are making significant changes to the air passenger rights. J'annonce des changements aux droits des passagers aériens. These changes are included in our Budget Implementation Act, Bill C-47, that was tabled in the House of Commons last Thursday, which we hope will pass soon. Once these measures are implemented, they will strengthen air passenger protection and simplify the complaint process. Among the new changes, amendments would make compensation the default unless specifically cited as a limited exception. Les compensations vont être obligatoires. So, in addition to being entitled to a refund, most air passengers will be entitled to financial compensation. Right now, compensation for delays and cancellation is only required for disruptions caused by the airline, and which is not a safety issue. With the new changes, we would be combining the current three categories, which are disruption within the airline's control, within the airline's control but necessary for safety, and outside the control of the airline, into a single category where everyone would be entitled to compensation except for a clear list of exceptions. These exceptions would be established by the Canadian Transportation Agency through a regulatory process within which Canadian and industry stakeholders are consulted. This means there will be no more loopholes where airlines can claim a disruption is caused by something outside of their control for a security reason when it's not. And it will no longer be the passenger who will have to prove that he or she is entitled to compensation. It will now be the airline that will need to prove that it does not have to pay for it. This will make the process much simpler and push the burden of proof onto the airlines. The changes in the legislation would also include implementing standards of treatment, like paying for your food if your flight is canceled or delayed due, for example, to a snowstorm. Since last summer, we also saw how lost baggage impacted passengers. That's why our proposed changes to the Bill of Rights would put in place new requirements which will be announced in the next few weeks for delayed and lost baggage. Il y aura de nouvelles exigences pour le bagage. We will also require airlines to establish an internal process for dealing with air travel claims, and they will be required to manage passenger complaints within 30 days. We're also proposing to hold airlines more accountable by allowing the Canadian Transportation Agency to recover the cost of air passenger complaints from the airlines, giving airlines a stronger incentive to address complaints directly with travelers as soon as possible. Of course, we expect these measures will reduce the number of complaints referred to the agency, but for those that do reach the agency, we're proposing to make the process even more efficient. Under these amendments, the CTA would clear air passenger complaints sooner by replacing its current adjudication process for resolving disputes with a simplified process completed by their staff. These changes also build on the nearly $76 million over 3 years in added funding I recently announced to the agency to help clear the current backlog of complaints. Finally, to ensure even greater accountability, we are strengthening the CTA by increasing the maximum fines they can impose from $25,000 to $250,000. Les amendes seront plus élevées. I know there may be some, mostly airlines, who claim that we are unfairly targeting them with these new measures to hold them accountable. First, let me be very clear. These measures are not meant to demonize airlines. Thousands of airline employees go to work every day, committed to doing their best to provide excellent service to their customers. Airline employees have been going through an unprecedented period of challenges, and I know that they are doing their best under extraordinary circumstances. It's important, though, to acknowledge that when a passenger purchases a ticket, that is a transaction between a passenger and the airline. So it is the airline's responsibility to make sure they uphold their obligations to their customers. There's a significant imbalance in power here between airlines and their customers, where customers could suffer considerable consequences if a service they purchased was not delivered properly. I believe there is a role for government to fix this imbalance and help ensure that passengers are protected. I also want to be clear on another matter. We are still pursuing shared accountability across the sector by imposing new public data sharing requirements for airports and air carriers. We will also be requiring all those within the air transportation system to share more data with one another to ensure the best possible experience for passengers. More data sharing and greater transparency will enable the creation of a more accountable system for everyone. Stay tuned for additional measures to be announced in the coming months. Thank you again. Merci.
OK, donc on passe à la période de questions. On en a pour environ 25 minutes, comme je disais tantôt. On commence avec Judy Trim, TV.
Good morning, Ms. Minister. I'd like to know, you said some exceptions. What are those exceptions that would not qualify for automatic compensation for passengers that you say are clearly outlined?
I mean, there's the obvious one, a snowstorm. A snowstorm will have obviously an impact on traffic, air traffic, and airlines are not responsible for snowstorms, just like snowstorms have an impact on road traffic, on rail traffic. I think Canadians understand when there's a snowstorm. But let me just say that those specific examples will be sorted out in the consultation process. So the idea here is to be very narrow in what these exemptions or exceptions are, and to be very clear for customers so they know what the expectations are, and for airlines so they know what the expectations are.
So given that last Christmas during that holiday season, there was a surge of complaints because of delays due to a few days of a snowstorm, which are you saying that the majority of those individuals who filed claims over the holiday period it'll be unlikely for them to get compensation?
First, let me just say that the majority, I'm not gonna now speculate because I don't have it in front of me what the percentage of complaints, but much of the complaints started in the summer, last summer, at the start of the air sector after COVID. There were a lot of cancellation and delays because of operational challenges, surge in demand, inability to provide that service. So we're going to be very clear about those type of delays and cancellation. Second, what we are proposing today is that there are new additional stricter requirements, even for snowstorms, when it comes to standard of treatment. So those who are whose planes were delayed because of a snowstorm, there's going to be a new standard of treatment that passengers need to be receiving from the airlines. For example, like a food that they should be provided while they're waiting for a delay. So second, they are still going to be entitled to a refund. If a flight is delayed or canceled because of a snowstorm and the customer wants a refund, they can ask for a refund. The other category we're talking about is additional compensation on top of the refund.
Valérie Mikalabin, for Canada.
So airlines are saying that this should be a shared responsibility in some certain situation. What do you say to that when delays are because of security, because of no one's available to put baggage, luggage on the planes, etc.
Yeah, let me again, I referred to this in my remarks. Let me just say, first and foremost, airlines are the ones who sold a transaction, a contract to a customer. Customer paid the airlines to receive a service. Therefore, the airlines are responsible for delivering that service. Now, I do not deny the fact that the air sector is highly interdependent, and when certain things happen in one area, it has an impact on another area. And therefore, that's why we are moving towards a shared accountability system. That would not be within the Air Passenger Bill of Rights, because the Air Passenger Bill of Rights is a regime that protects or covers the contract between the airlines and the passenger. The budget talks about new data sharing and new information sharing that will enable a creation of a shared accountability in the system. So, for example, now when we have more information about the performance of the airport, the airline can hold the airport accountable if they fail to deliver on a certain standard. So that is something we're moving towards, and I agree that it's going to be helpful for the increased efficiency of the system. But that's a different area than the Air Passenger Bill of Rights. But we're working on it.
And I think the backlog of complaints is at 42,000 right now. What's with these new measures? Are we going to see them dealt with in a quicker fashion? Will they be allowed to get reimbursed based on those new rules?
So these changes are on top of the $76 million that I announced recently to the CTA. The CTA now has more resources to deal with the backlog. But yes, we are proposing new rules that, in my opinion, will first reduce the number of complaints the CTA receives, because it's in the airline's vested interest that they deal with them before they go to the CTA. Second, we're improving the efficiency of the process of the CTA. So when the CTA receives a complaint, they can process them much faster than the current process. So there's no need for it to go to an adjudicator anymore, and that CTA staff can make a decision on a faster decision. So yes, it will improve the efficiency of handling complaints, and hopefully we can see that backlog get dealt with much quicker.
Minister Melise, EP.
Sure. So these new provisions, the onus of proof is now on the airlines when it comes to any delays that they say is because of security reasons. But in the EU, there are no exceptions. Another difference between what's proposed here and in the EU is passenger compensation is still not going to be automatic here, whereas it is there. So I'm just wondering why not align our policies with the EU when often they're kind of the gold standard when it comes to passenger protections.
So my understanding is that the EU still has some exceptions for weather. We are actually working on understanding the and benefiting from the systems around the world in the EU and in the United States. So the EU has exemption for weather, and in the EU, the customer still has to complain, has to file a complaint. So we are actually consistent with the EU. In fact, we have stronger measures being proposed in this bill than the EU. Standard treatment, lost luggage or delayed luggage, the EU doesn't have regulation for delayed luggage. So I would argue that this new proposal is tougher than the EU, and I would argue it is tougher than the United States.
Thank you. And my second question is with regards to the powers, the greater powers that are being given to the CTA. The agency, I mean, critics have said that the agency hasn't always leaped into the defense of passengers or jumped to penalize airlines. And so I'm wondering, to what extent is this legislation going to transform the agency into more of an enforcement body rather than a complaint handling tribunal?
The additional resources to the CTA will help provide more tools to the CTA so they're able to focus on not only managing complaints, but also following up on enforcement. Second, the streamlining of reducing the number of complaints and the streamlining of the complaint process will again enable the CTA to dedicate more resources to enforcement. So I feel, and thirdly, increasing the fines. It sends a signal to the CTA that enforcement is an integral and important part of their role. So I feel that this will help provide more tools to the CTA, so not only to process complaints, but to ensure that the rights are enforced properly.
Antoine Trépanier, Le Droit.
Good morning, Minister. My question is regarding the strike. PSAC is now aiming for ports and maybe even airports later on this week. First, how do you react to their strategy? And can you tell us a little bit of your plan to limit the disruption for Canadians?
Look, I've repeated before, our government repeated before, is that the best way to reach a resolution is at the negotiation table. And I hope that we're able to reach a resolution soon. I feel, it's the last thing that Canadians want to deal with today is additional disruptions to how to things or services that they need. But I do believe that the best way to reach a resolution is at the negotiation table. We are Transport Canada's employees. A significant majority of them are considered essential. So things that are related to safety and enforcement are functioning well. We have reached out to airports, to ports, to others to make sure that we're coordinating together in case there are pickets or disruptions. There are some minor administrative things that may have an impact. For now, we haven't seen that yet, but we're following and monitoring the situation, and I hope that we don't see any significant disruptions to the flow of passengers and goods.
What is the proportion of the public servants in your department who are still working business as usual and are not participating in the strike? And what is the impact regarding your partnership with vendors or partners that you might have at this strike?
So 2/3 of Transport Canada's employees are considered essential workers. And there's some aspects that are not essential. Some of them, as I said, are administrative, like processing licenses or certificates, call centers. So we are monitoring what kind of impact that will have. It hasn't so far been at least felt by the general public, but will and because management at TC or Transport Canada is doing their best to fill in the gaps, but certainly we have to keep monitoring what kind of additional impact it could have.
Number 13, CPC.
Prime Minister, the transit stakeholder group is meeting on the Hill today, and they're going to be talking to the media, and they're going to be talking about ways to address violence on, regional, local transportation systems. Are you concerned about the violence that we're seeing on these transportation systems, and do you think that there is a role for the federal government to help?
First, let me be very clear. I am extremely concerned about the recent increase in violence on local transit around the country. And the federal, while again, law enforcement and the management of public transit is the responsibility of local municipality and sometimes provinces, the federal government will be there if there's a role for the federal government to offer assistance. We will be there, and I'm very much interested in hearing recommendation from municipalities on what can the federal government do to stamp down this new phenomena.
Okay, and coming back to your announcement today, I have a whole list of questions. How will these changes apply to passengers who are getting on planes, spring break, summer vacation? I'm assuming this will not help them. And how do you respond to maybe airlines who are listening to your announcement and will say, well, we're going to have to increase our fees if we're going to have a $250,000 fine. And then finally, does this apply to, Via Rail? So those three questions.
Let me start with the last question. This is an air passenger bill of rights. So unless Via starts selling airline tickets, it doesn't apply to Via. However, let me just say that I'm still waiting for the internal review is being conducted by Via by a third party on what had happened over Christmas period to see what recommendations we need to put in place. There's going to be a new CEO announced shortly for Via, so there's work ongoing there. Look, this bill, the Budget Implementation Act, will have some changes. Once it passed, we'll have some changes that get immediately implemented, and some changes will still require regulatory changes that will require consultation. So as soon as the bill is passed, some changes will take effect immediately, and it could have an impact on the spring travel season. On the question of airlines, again,